All right, let's share my screen again. Okay, can everybody see my presentation on screen now? Okay,
Yes.
excellent. Excellent. So again, welcome to, is this the second class of this program?
Yes.
All right, well, welcome to your second class about the Rogue Valley Council of Governments. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about specific project area of what the Natural Resources Department does. I'm Greg Stayback, and I'm the Natural Resources Program Manager. And I'm going to talk about restoration and post-fire recovery. And I've been with the Council of Governments going on 22 years. So I've been here quite a long time. So I've got to see restoration firsthand from its early days until what it's evolving in now, and hope to be around to see how it continues to grow. So the overview, just my talk today, is to provide a very brief background on the Natural Resources Department. I think Anne-Marie touched upon what the COG does as a whole. I just wanted to give you, like, I think I have 2 slides of highlights. Really want to focus the talk today on Bear Creek. I want to provide some context in the Rogue Basin and talk just very briefly about watersheds or basins and watershed health and kind of the way we think and how that ties into riparian health and restoration, kind of how we define riparian corridors, what we mean by restoration, and then really focus on a restoration discussion. And we're going to put a heavy emphasis on the fire recovery, and we're going to look at it through a partnership that we're involved with and currently coordinate called the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative. So kind of look at it as a member and as part of that group and how we've responded to initial fire stabilization, moving into recovery and restoration. And again, if I should have plenty of time for questions at the end, if anybody has anything they want me to clarify on the spot, I'm happy to take questions. And I know that Jody, I think, will also be monitoring the chat to see if anybody has questions there, since I don't have that running during my presentation. So just wanted to list some objectives and some questions. So these are some of the things that I hope to accomplish by the time our talk is done, and give you an idea about what our role is in restoration. Do we have a plan, or do we follow a plan? What our role was in fire response. Was there a plan for the response? And then more specifically, what is it, or what was it? Talk about what the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative is, and then just touch upon kind of the regional projects, because there are, I mentioned Envision Bear Creek for those of you who were here earlier, and that's causing some confusion. Like, the work we're doing should feed directly into that project, but there is some confusion with that project and another one that I'll mention, just to be clear of how everything hopefully fits together. So the Natural Resources Department, we were formed in 1978 as the Water Resources Department. And I just pulled our mission statement, and it's really looking at conserving, working with communities and partners to conserve and enhance the health of our watersheds. Really look at regional strategies, and really looking at, trying to find a balance between economic well-being and healthy natural systems. So looking at, multiple objectives. We want healthy natural systems, but we also live here, and, certainly want to find a balance if we can. So I believe we're the only council of governments in the state with a Natural Resources Department, and I think we're one of the few in the country. A lot of our focus is on regional natural resources concern. A big one we work on, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks, is the Clean Water Act. And, that includes a lot of our restoration activities, water quality, urban runoff. There's also the Endangered Species Act that kind of directs a lot of the work that we do. And then we have a whole host of other programs that we're involved with: clean air, brownfields, education, drinking water. So again, very connected with natural resources in our region. So our roles, again, we're coordinators, facilitators, implementers, advisors. We're a very small department, so we wear many hats. So that makes it actually fun. So again, there's a lot of different things that we do. So we really find that collaboration is really a key to success. So we, as an organization and a department, we work a lot with the municipalities, so the cities and the counties, primarily in Jackson and Josephine, but we have worked also with communities in Curry County, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we also work with federal, state, local agencies. We work with watershed council, soil and water conservation districts, local groups, non-governmental organizations, schools, the public. So again, our programs are built on this collaboration model. And then this is just a note that this is one of 3 presentations from our department. Next week, we're going to talk about education and volunteer programs. And then the week after, we'll talk about water quality, Clean Water Act. So I might touch upon some things, but it may be in future programs where we really cover them in detail. So why focus on Bear Creek? It's the most urbanized watershed in the Rogue Basin. So tons of people live here. So it's very visible. There's a lot of concerns. Because people live here, there's a lot of regulations or restrictions. We have temperature concerns, we have bacteria, nutrients at different times of the year, just the way that water moves, water is used, stormwater, agriculture, all those activities have the potential to impact the system. It's where the BCRI is the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative. And I think I defined most of my acronyms before I used them and tried to refrain from using too many. It's where we're focused. There have been multiple fires, of course, most recently the Alameda and the Table Rock fire, Central Point in Bear Creek Basin. There's Open Chain, but that wasn't in Bear Creek. We have the ties to the communities, the tie to the Greenway and recreation. And there's also still some good habitat. And, we still have Bear Creek has very good salmon runs, all things considered. We still have Chinook and coho salmon and steelhead that come back every year. So it's still a very valuable and important salmon stream. And if you haven't seen them swim up Bear Creek, it's very, very interesting. I think it's amazing to see. Usually October when the fall Chinook come back is the best time. There's amazing to see. So we really want to keep it as a valuable fish resource. I mentioned the Rogue Basin. So we think about as restoration, natural resources folks, our boundaries are geographic. So a watershed basically is an area of land that drains to the same point. So if you think about raining on a ridge top, the water eventually would reach a water body via surface flow or via ground flow. In this case, it's the Rogue River. So the area that's outlined runs from around Crater Lake through Gold Beach is the Rogue Basin. That's what we're part of. And here's where Bear Creek is a tributary of the Rogue Basin. So this is what we're focusing on today. You have the Applegate River, the Illinois River. So again, we're thinking of basins, we're thinking of watershed health. So I mentioned that we do some work with the lower Rogue, Curry County. That's why, because again, we're looking at the geographic constrictions, not necessarily political boundaries. So this is just a map of the Bear Creek watershed. So again, going from the Rogue Basin, going into Bear Creek. See if I can get the pointer up. So Penn here. So we have Mount Ashland's over here. Pilot Rock is here. I think Siskiyou Summit kind of runs down here. So Emigrant Reservoir. So where Bear Creek officially starts is where you have Walker and Emigrant come together kind of off Dead Indian Road, and that is the official start of the name part of Bear Creek. And Bear Creek flows toward Medford, toward Central Point, and goes into the Rogue right around the Table Rocks. So it's a kind of a complex system. Again, a lot of urban area. If you notice these green lines that are all over, that's irrigation. There are several hundred miles of irrigation canals. So water is moved all over. And then hopefully you can see on the map, these are fish species. And if you look at the individual tributaries, you see that there's fish all over this map. And some of the species even make it as far up as Reeder Reservoir. So again, very, very important fish resource. So again, drives our restoration work as well. So riparian corridor, what does it mean to us? How do we define it? It's the areas that are on both sides of the creek or river. It includes the habitat, the floodplain, recreational, and other elements. So again, there's riparian areas and there's the corridor. So again, we're looking a little bit broader. And for us, it's the Bear Creek riparian area, the floodplain, and the greenway primarily. In some areas, a little bit narrower, like downtown Medford. It definitely includes some of the urban area as well. And then just if you want to look at it graphically, this is essentially kind of a reminded me a little bit of Bear Creek or what Bear Creek could look like. So we have the shows here. You have some recreation, you have some functions of healthy riparian areas, cooling water, providing wildlife corridor, stabilizing stream banks, erosion control, and then how it integrates with the landscape. So the riparian corridor is all the land that's really connected to the stream. So you have tree roots. In this case, it goes a little bit broader. So again, we're looking at that larger area and really thinking about function, what's there, and if something is missing, what do we need to do to bring it back? So that's kind of the key of our restoration vision. This is just a different way to show a little bit more of a rural riparian area. So again, it includes both, has very characteristic vegetation, tree roots help hold soil in place to prevent erosion. You have both surface flow, subsurface flow, and everything can again tied into the creek. So again, very creek focused. Most of our restoration activities are, at least what I'm talking about today. So some important concepts, some of the things that we think about in riparian areas are native species, invasive species. I mentioned functions again, that's really our focus of restoration and recovery. And then just if we go out in the field and take a look at habitat, we assess what's there, and there's some good graphics from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that show some of these concepts. I figured I would share those as the best way to explain that. So native species, I just pulled this definition from Wikipedia. It's a species that originated and developed in its surrounding habitat and has adapted to living in this particular environment. So we really like native species because they're adapted for living conditions here in Southern Oregon. We have very hot, very dry summers. We have fires. Some of these species, their life cycle and seeds and regrowth is dependent on the fire cycle. So they're much more likely to live without a lot of care. And then they also tend to attract birds, wildlife, butterflies, pollinators that we want to see and provide a variety of them, and what we're used to seeing here and part of what makes this area special. So some examples, again, these are, since I'm talking riparian restoration, tree focused. So big leaf maples, ponderosa pine, incense cedar, snowberry, mock orange, red flowering currant. What's pictured is this is a big leaf maple leaf. And then this is a Douglas spirea, and this is elderberry. So all local native plants. Then our other concern, one of the things I want to touch upon is, do we have a plan? And interspersed throughout the presentation, I have examples of resources we use. There's a lot of great plant lists. So this just shows some local trees, shrubs, grasses, wildflowers, and restoration plants, because one of the things that we're thinking about in restoration is again getting the layers in. So looking at ground cover, looking at kind of the interim layer, the shrub layer, and then our canopy layer, again, thinking these functions, habitat, shade. And then in this case, this has some general recommendations for conditions that the plants like. So we're trying to match, if a plant is in an area that's open, gets a lot of sun, we want to find a plant that likes a lot of sun. So this is the sun symbol here. So invasive species, they pulled these definitions from the US Geological Survey. So they're a little bit broader. An invasive species is an introduced non-native organism. It can be a disease, parasite, plant, or animal that begins to spread or expand its range from the site of its original introduction and has the potential to cause harm to the environment, the economy, or to human health. So what we generally see is if the plants, birds might transport seeds a long way, somebody brings in a plant they like from somewhere else, there's nothing that prevents the spread. There's no natural predators. There's nothing that eats it. There's not really managed. They have mechanisms, spikes, and they can essentially poison the soil, and they can outcompete natives. So some of them are very difficult to remove once they're established, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, of invasive species that we're trying to manage in riparian areas. And as soon as you get rid of one, essentially what happens is another one comes in, so you have to keep at it. So it's a very difficult problem. So some examples, again, this is the wider definition from the USGS. So it says the West Nile virus, chestnut blight, fire ants, zebra mussels, also tamarisk, which actually we do have in Bear Creek. We found along Bear Creek. Kudzu vine, house sparrow, starlings, and nutria. I think we have nutria out here. And just a few examples of some of the plants that we're dealing with along the riparian area is this is poison hemlock at an early stage. This is purple loosestrife. Other invasives that we deal with, English ivy, blackberries, just to name a few. So again, there's a whole host of concerns. So again, we're trying to return the area to a more native habitat, getting rid of invasives, and trying to let the plants that we want either come back on their own or help them by planting some more. So I mentioned functions. So really it's a lot of times people don't really think about all the value that healthy streams provide. It protects stream banks from erosion. It filters pollutants from stormwater runoff. So if you get water just flowing over the surface, you'll get some of it going into the soil. The plants will uptake some of the pollutants in their roots, or they can reduce flood damage. The riparian areas are designed to essentially flood, store water temporarily, so it doesn't flood streets or homes or anything else. Again, it doesn't always work in an urban environment, but a natural stream provides that storage, creates wildlife habitat, and it provides shade to streams. Curious if anybody has any ideas of why the shade is so important to this local streams. Like, what does it do? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Why is it so important?
Cooling the water?
Cooling the water, that's very good. And why is in this area cooling the water so important?
Fish?
Fish, very good. So the salmon are cold water species, so they like cold water. So anything we can do to help increase flows or provide shade really helps the salmon out. And again, as I mentioned, the runs are still pretty healthy. So other, just general riparian functions, kind of in a more broad context, food and shelter for wildlife. We mentioned the lower water temperatures. It also helps lower temperatures help get more oxygen in water. Protection of soil with ground cover. I mentioned roots, and here it shows there's a variety of wildlife and a variety of trees, the layers, different habitat structures. So this is something that's looking fairly healthy. So this is an example of, again, this I mentioned before, of some good habitat. So what I'm looking at in this is if we go out and assess an area, the first thing we do is take a look at, okay, what do we think is the habitat good or bad, and why or why not? We have surveys that look at, trees and wildlife and a lot of different factors. So what I'm seeing in this picture, what this shows again, is the multiple layers of canopy. So you have shrubs and you have trees. So that's providing your shade and some of your water quality benefits. This is a bird's eye view. So what it's allowing is the channel to what they call meander. So it allows it to kind of go out and back. So that helps with flooding, provides areas for floods to basically store water. So until it goes down, there's nice structure, like the fish like logs and streams, they create pools. So basically if fish are swimming upstream and they get tired, they have places where they can hide from predators, they can rest, the water is generally colder. You see there's nice different substrates, so there's nice rocks, and the way the water is moving also generally creates oxygen. So again, there's a lot of different related factors in what makes a good riparian habitat. So, and this is kind of a little bit of an extreme example, but this shows really, bad habitat. There's no trees, there's no ground cover, there's nothing to prevent whatever's running over the surface to get in the water. It's really shallow, it gets really hot, there's no oxygen, so it's really tough environment for fish. Unfortunately, the fire did impact, this area here, and in some ways did, removed vegetation and a lot of the natural functions. So that's really one of the things we're focused on. The long-term effects in the channel we're still looking at to see what's going to happen. So summary, again, just some highlights. With bad habitat, there's no vegetation, there's no complexity, and I know complexity is probably a little bit of a abstract concept, but that's what I was talking about with the allowing the streams to move and providing different substrates. That is an indicator of complexity. There's no water, fish get stranded, there's a lot of invasive species, and then when the fish get stranded, they're also much more likely to be something will get them, animals, in some cases even people. And then again, I think I covered the good salmon habitat in detail. So from a restoration standpoint, we had a lot of areas. The restoration program has been going on for a long while. I think we started our efforts in about 2002, identifying areas that we thought, lacked one or more of the functions and could really benefit from restoration projects. So we have potential restoration projects in yellow. We have green that are restoration projects that are either active or completed. And then we also have the restoration initiative priority areas. So we've been looking at this for a long time. The collective region has been restoring projects for, 20 years or more. So there's a lot of good work that's being done, but the more work we do, of course, there's always more to do. And then you have something really catastrophic or game-changing event like the fire that throws a big monkey wrench into the plans. So what is restoration? Again, we use the term fairly broadly. So we kind of lump in a lot of terms that, I realize that if you took the strict definition of restoration, some of these may not fit in directly, but, we include it to, consider areas that protected areas. If areas are disturbed, give them time to recover. If they're in a pristine state and they have good floodplains, good plans, we may want to protect them, collect seeds. So that's one element. Restore or rehabilitate areas. And in order to do that, we really have to focus on management and removal of invasive species. And then also the planting of native trees, shrubs, and ground cover. So it's active help in those areas. And then I mentioned we really are looking to restore functions. In a lot of cases, it's usually more than one function is missing. So we're trying to, again, get as many as we can. And then we're also thinking of, once these sites get established, long-term maintenance. And then there's lots of other projects or aspects we can tie in. We can look at in-stream habitat. I briefly mentioned putting in log structures to create pools, create habitat, fish passage, barrier removals, connecting the floodplain, so when it floods, there's some storage areas for the water so it doesn't cause damage to structures. So just general strategies. I think this is from the Freshwater Trust. Some of the things that I think I've mentioned, most of these: planting trees, looking at ways to increase stream flow, removing invasive plants, again, building that in-stream structure, removing fish barriers, and protecting stream banks. So again, those are kind of lofty goals, general categories of strategies that we use. And then kind of getting into looking at more specific, kind of the restoration initiative lens, talk a little bit about, what was being done, how we kind of pivoted once the fire happened, and then talk a little bit about the future. And as I mentioned, I would kind of touch upon resources. There are a lot of different plant lists that we all draw from. We have the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative priority sites that we're focused on for restoration. We have different riparian planting guides. So again, what we do, we draw from a number of different sources, but it's fairly standardized amongst all of us, which is one of the things that led to the formation of the initiative, the Restoration Initiative. And I know,
Right.
Yep.
Can we ask a quick question? I was waiting to see if this would fit in on our restoration and recovery summary, but a question in the chat about utilizing mycorrhizal, if I'm saying that correctly, fungi in restoration.
Mycorrhizal.
Mycorrhizal.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, and we do in areas, especially post-fire, where some of the soil's been essentially sterilized, or some of our challenging sites, we will put some of that in. I mean, it's done on a more select basis. Some of the nurseries like Plant Oregon, I know, do plan for that, and it is an important part of the restoration machine, the restoration process, making sure that the soil processes, the microbes, and all those are functioning as well.
All right. Anne, did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Great. All right. Thank you, Greg.
And then I know I'm going a little out of order, but the way the presentation flowed, I kind of wanted to jump in and just give some concepts of what we're thinking out and down the line, since I really didn't have a lot of time to cover it. But, as we're evolving and thinking about changing from fire and the conditions we've seen, thinking about how do we prepare for a changing climate. It seems that, we're getting it's getting hotter, it's getting drier, we're getting more frequent fires. So it's kind of been a reality. So just how can we possibly, plan for that? Water, multiple drought years, water is getting very scarce. So this year in particular, if we have planting projects, we're not sure we're going to have water to water the plants. And even the native species typically need a little bit to get going. Usually a couple of years of supplemental irrigation. It can be drip system or pretty minimal, but that's something that we're currently struggling with. Water was I know Lomacasi last year had problems getting water. There's a high water demand because there's a lot of uses, especially for agriculture and and I think in the hemp and the marijuana industry, I know there was a lot of demand for water trucks. So it was really hard to get water. How do we continue to increase our fire resiliency, build in fire breaks, thinking about there's been so many fires along the Greenway and other places. How can we plan for that, knowing that they're coming? Again, talking about the floodplain connections or reconnections. This area is getting bigger. So how can we, just again, those thinking about multiple uses and users there, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but there are competing uses for the resource. So how can we best manage that? And then also long-term maintenance. That's been a big issue because a lot of the funding of the projects is more sporadic, more grant funded, more foundation funded. So, we get the projects implemented. We can take care of them for a couple of years, but it's very costly to maintain a project over the long period. So if you don't replace plants, you don't control invasive species, it kind of leads to long-term problems. So trying to figure out how to do that. And that's why we're looking at some of the regional projects, the larger tie-in to the Greenway, as maybe there's a way to tie into some of that work to help not only take care of the trail, but some of the habitat needs and some of the restoration that's been happening as well. So in just that, the significance of riparian habitat and the need for restoration has been around for a long time. I mentioned, I think we started about 2002, and we're one of the only local groups that were actively restoring streams, and that was driven by the Clean Water Act, the need to provide shade, protect water quality. And now there's a lot of momentum and a lot of groups that are doing great work in this area. So I mentioned, planting trees, again, simple, they're effective, really good along riverbanks. So again, just talking shrubs, herbaceous plants, wildlife habitat. So it's great to plant trees. So we do a lot of that. Again, the emphasis is on native species, pollinator species. We're kind of moving into fire resistance. So this is just covering some highlights of some of the things that we currently do. So this is actually Craig, who works for us, planting incense cedar. Again, getting back to those resources, there's a lot of great guides and resources. And I heard there was somebody very interested in landscaping. And this is a list of trees and shrubs that comes from the Oregon Rain Garden Guide. And this is a great resource if you want to design your own rain garden. It has a step-by-step how to. It's from Oregon State University Extension, covers designs and testing your soil and plants. So again, there's a lot of things that, we're seeing some of these go into parks, some of these going into local homes. So there is, the community is helping out with, the larger question of water quality and urban runoff. So pollinators, very important. This is a great area for monarchs and other pollinators. So as part of the current restoration, we are getting species back in, reestablishing some of the gardens that were lost in the fire, and then also increasing the opportunity for milkweed and other plants for the pollinator species, since this is a really important stop on the flyover routes. And then again, a lot of resources, a lot of how to, we have a lot of different tools in our toolbox for planting on, difficult slopes, doing different strategies with bundles and pole cuttings and staking. So there's just a lot of different methods we use to kind of build the plant communities. So again, this is a planting plan. Again, I know there was some, do we have a plan? We have lots of plans. So usually what we do is we bring all our resources together. We take a look at a specific site and we come up with something like this for the specific site. And this is actually intended for along the greenway, because here this is actually representing the path. So you have Bear Creek, kind of the floodplain, the bench, and then where the area is. So you have different plants in different zones. Zone A, the plants like to get wet, so we recommend species that like to get wet. The zone B is a little bit harsher environment, so some of the hardier plants like a little bit drier. And then zone C typically tends to be the driest, so plants that like it quite a bit drier. So this is some planting along the greenway in Medford. So just some examples of just work in action. This is we rely on volunteers, we rely on planting crews. Look like that's probably snowberry. Looking at building habitat for, leaving snags in place for wildlife, for birds. I'm going to keep touching upon this invasive species management. One of the first things we have to do is get rid of the blackberries before we can put anything in. And if our restoration is successful, we'll get the native plants to grow and be able to outcompete the blackberries. So again, yeah, it's definitely snowberry. So again, more blackberries. In some cases, we have, contractors work with larger equipment. I think this is actually ODOT helping in Medford. I mentioned removal of invasives. Again, it's a lot of work. We use landscaping crews, we use community justice crews, volunteers, but it's an ongoing process. And then we have other concerns, of course, removing trash. So again, just a lot involved in the basics of restoration. And I mentioned how we left some logs in for habitat, but see, here's blackberries. This is poison hemlock. So again, invasive species are a challenge. So that was kind of some of the basic strategies that we use, again, thinking about functions, native plants, managing invasive habitat, all of those. And, we felt we had time, we used identified areas, we had time to build the plan. And then in September 2020, we got the fires, the Alameda fire in particular, and Table Rock, really everything changed. We really had a hustle to do some short-term recovery, and then, kind of change our strategies a little bit as we move into mid and long-term recovery. So this is the area that was burned by the Alameda fire. I didn't have I call it the Table Rock fire. I'm not sure. Central Point fire is up in here. So actually two separate fires. And connected along the greenway. So a few pictures I took fairly early as part of the survey work right after the fire. I think it was about 2 weeks after. I think everybody's fairly familiar with again, what it looked like. We found a lot of, erosion, drainages that we didn't know about, a lot of garbage, fuel tanks. Again, it opened up riparian areas, which was, good and bad. One of the things that we wrestled with for years, I mentioned invasive species. There's so much blackberry that it was really financially unmanageable. So having it all burned away kind of gave us an ecological reset. So we really felt we really needed to get on trying to manage the invasives and, start rehabilitating from the fire. And just, there's just some amazing things out there, amazing in mostly a bad way, but just post devastation. So getting into the
Right.
yes.
There is a question of how do the jurisdictional boundaries impact boundaries impact who does what? I think, who oversees the funds and the actual work, because I think we kind of run into this where it runs from community to community, and if I'm following your question there.
For general management of the Greenway, there's a group called the Joint Powers. So basically it's representatives of all of the 6 jurisdictions that own portions of the Greenway. So they have kind of a board, a kind of a governing body, and there's some funding attached to doing major projects, but they're more focused on, trail paving and some of those, maintenance of the trail. So that's one element of the management of the corridor, but again, that's strictly recreational based. And then each jurisdiction does kind of their own management. So in some cases, it might be direct funding to pay for projects. They might direct staff, they may hire, community justice crews or contractors, and it varies by the community. And then there are also different regulations. And then for us and most of our partners, most of our work is grant based. So we work with the communities to, they provide assistance, and we go out, secure funding, and help the communities with restoration, whether it's, generally it's hiring contractors or to do the work. So hopefully that answers the question. It's a little bit of a complex question.
Yes, thank you.
So the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative, I want to talk about, this is, we were already working when the fire happened, which it turned out to be, I guess, certainly beneficial, because although the fire was terrible, I don't want to downplay that at all. Some of the collaborations and the foundations that were already existing really helped us in the response. And I want to just note that it was formed before the fire, and that we were operating under a plan. So really, it formed in 2019. Ironically, it formed after the Penninger fire. So over by the Expo Center, there was I think it was 120-acre fire. So a bunch of all the local practitioners that were doing work in restoration had been for years, said, well, let's just get together. We're all essentially doing we're using the same methods, where, it'd be a lot better for us to just work collaboratively. We weren't not, but just to really officially, collaborate and look at the Greenway as a whole, the corridor as a whole. We operate under an MOA, so it's completely voluntary. There's no funding attached to it. And again, we're looking at habitat and floodplain. There's a core technical team, a larger regional team, and we took a look at the Bear Creek Greenway, said, okay, here's our high priority areas. Rather than using the Band-Aid approach, again, this is pre-fire, let's go pursue funding to get these taken care of and then start filling in the gaps. And one of the things that we had to do was really rethink traditional management, because, what we were seeing, like I can say personally from working in restoration for over 20 years, that things are really changing along the Greenway. We have a lot of different users and sectors. I mean, there's fish and wildlife concern, there's recreation, public safety, the unhoused population, others, as I mentioned earlier, some of them are competitive uses. So how can you best manage these? Because just focusing on, for example, just really making it incredibly dense for fish and wildlife habitat and benefits wasn't working with some of these others. So again, it's looking at this wider need. And then trying to figure out, again, I mentioned the long-term management and maintenance. So the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative, kind of the vision for Bear Creek, is to have it as a centerpiece of Ashland, Talent, Phoenix, and Central Point communities, such that commercial and residential developments will embrace the creek as an amenity, that the corridor is an inviting and safe place for people of all ages to recreate and experience all that nature has to offer, that it's a urban forest with enough infrastructure along its length and occasional irrigated manicured park-like settings that allow emergency responders to combat and contain fires. So that, again, ties in recreation, ties in those fire elements I mentioned, that it's a wide belt of native trees and shrubs, clean water, and complex habitat. Again, so providing some of the elements that are near and dear to our heart, and then also a place of opportunity for employment and volunteer engagement. Again, it's really just rethinking restoration, looking at multiple objectives and trying to, again, do the best we can to, come up with a strategy that meets as many needs as we realistically can. So organizations that are participating in the restoration initiative, the Rogue River Watershed Council, Freshwater Trust, Jackson County, Rogue Valley Sewer Services, Rogue Valley Council of Governments, Loma Katsi Restoration Project, Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District, Rogue Riverkeeper, Cow Creek, the Rogue Basin Partnership, Southern Oregon Monarch Advocates, Rogue Native Plant Partnership, and local nurseries. So again, a lot of us that are just here, local, working, are all part of this group. And then I know there's a lot of interest in what was done for the fire, what our role in the fire was. As I mentioned, we were already meeting, doing all this work. So a lot of the members were part of the core response team. So Jackson County, as the largest, having the largest bandwidth, and not bandwidth, the largest area of impact, because they're all along both fire areas, all along the trail, kind of put together a core response team. And our initial charge was really to look at our phase 1 response. And that really was focused on site stabilization. And we were so focused on just getting the response done. Like we really didn't have there's really not a lot of public time for public outreach, public involvement, or public outreach in what we were doing. Yes.
I'm sorry, Mary has her hand up. I think she has a question for you.
Sorry, Mary.
How did you get rid of the unhoused population?
We did not get rid of the unhoused population. That's a management issue that's currently, I'm trying to figure, that's something that the Jackson County Envision Plan is looking at. It's just a recognition that is, there are people living there, and we've had, people camping on plants, using our plants for firewood and things along those lines. So really something has to be done. And as far as I know, no one has had any solutions. Things that we are looking at is working with groups that work with the unhoused population, and specifically working with Rogue Retreat. And one of the things that they have is they're looking at creating work crews from folks that live on the trail to provide, jobs, some money, and kind of giving back to this, and hoping that'll help raise the profile and, begin to address some of these concerns. Because again, no one has been able to figure it out to date that I'm aware of.
Right. Just to add to that, the city of Medford is really focusing on some issues with the unhoused, and they were attempting to create the urban campground, that they were moving people from the Greenway to the urban campground. The other thing they have that's kind of new and just getting up and going is the Navigation Center, which is actually a building at some property that they're developing, and the programs and services offered there are intended to assist those who are experiencing homelessness. There are actually rooms and showers and things that will be available. I forgive me for not knowing how far along the project is. There are several phases involved, but there are a lot of jurisdictions who are trying to do something. It's really an immense problem, and many different folks are working on it on many different angles, but as you know, it's a nationwide pandemic, so to speak, if you don't mind me using that word. So it's very concerning. And as Greg is focusing on just the impact of this on our greenway and riparian restoration and things going on, there are impacts that hit many different segments. So anyway, sorry for busting in. I just wanted to share that with the group. There are folks trying to work on some of these issues.
Yeah, thanks, Emery. As I said, I believe that the Envision Bear Creek, the visioning is going to also begin to look at that, at that issue as well. I don't think anybody expects that they will have a solution by the time, that work is done. But again, there's a number of efforts moving toward, initially, like for us at recognition and gee, what can we do? And then a number of groups which are moving to actions to try to figure out if there is something to do. Again, it's just an immensely complex problem. So again, our initial phase was the stabilization efforts only, and I'll get to that. And that was looking at our short term was, okay, the fire happened. What's the damage? Public safety, where do we, we closed all the areas, the riparian, the corridor got closed. Where do we need to get hazard trees down, stabilizing the sites in what would be a typical year. The fire happened early September. Come October, November, December, we're going to get rain. We have areas that are bare soil. We have, materials that were used in firefighting. We had anything that burned in the fire, the ash, all that could go straight into the creek. So very concerned about that. And the storm drain system, what could we do about that? Worried about massive erosion. I think about less than 2 weeks after the fire, I already had blackberries and dozens of other invasive species coming up. So it's like, man, we got to get on that. And then, looking at I mentioned the pollution prevention. So I'll talk in more detail about that. And then there's also a phase 2 midterm, which is kind of where we are now. I'll get into that a little bit. And then, phase 3. So we're kind of moving, I know we've been asked a number of times, is there a plan that, for restoration of the creek post fire? Yes and no. I can't point you to a website and say, this is the plan. We're working in stages. We have the phase 1 work done, the phase 2, and hopefully we can have something that we can direct folks to in the foreseeable future. So again, initially we were charged with looking at the damage assessment, identifying fire management, recovery, and protection strategies, identifying and mapping where the strategies are recommended, developing an implementation plan, including a schedule, and then I put continue or begin implementation because there are some things that were being done and some things that were a little bit further down the line. So the damage assessment and needs inventory. Again, this was kind of a very sobering experience for me. Got to get out and walk through the fire area once it was safe, mainly the trail because there was a lot of hazard trees, but just looking at, doing a detailed assessment of what was burned, what was left, where was there, garbage or car bodies or hazardous material, and what did it really look like. We were able to use new tools, and I'll show a little bit the GIS based surveys and GIS based mapping. So it was great. We could go out there. We had georeferenced locations, so latitude and longitude. They pop up on a map. You could attach pictures. So that was really helpful in developing our maps. And then also just in terms of throughout the process, looking at damage and then looking at as we're moving forward with restoration activities. So I briefly mentioned this is a ESRI program, a geographic information system. It's a pretty cool tool that we use a lot for data and for mapping. So this is actually a survey that I designed. This is just part of it. So this is actually what it looks like on your phone. So you go out to the field and you have a series of questions and you answer it, then you mark your location, and then it ends up showing up on a map. So this is actually a map that shows all these points here are different data points from the damage assessment. So it has when we were out there, who was doing the survey. In this case, Blue Heron, Berg River Watershed Council does a lot of work down there. And then, what the site looks like. So this is the picture, one of the 4 pictures that is attaches to that site. So in this area, wow, this is what it looks like. And then we can start getting an idea of what we need here. Like, okay, there's some pretty big erosion, there's no ground cover, there's no shrub layer. So really looking at happily right now, so this is probably reed canary grass, not a lot of invasives, not a lot of garbage. So this is, we use this information to prioritize our work. So again, some other areas for damage assessments. So I mentioned erosion. So you can see here, this is a pretty steep bank here. So this bank needs to be stabilized. So started thinking about, our second charge was to recommend strategies that might work. So here we have again the bank cutting, so needing to stabilize the banks. We have nothing covering the soil. It's like we have some garbage here. This was one of the more interesting, again, in a bad way, of something we uncovered. It's something that I'd heard about in my schooling. Is called Detroit riprap. So back in the 50s, they actually cabled car bodies together and used it to protect the banks. So it's hard to see, but these are all car bodies. I think there's about a dozen car bodies. That's a car body, that's a car body, that's a car body. And there's actually cabling going through. So as we had some of these, we found some very, fuel tanks and, some potential hazardous materials. So how we're going to get rid of those. I think in this case, this was left alone. Hopefully they remove the engines and gas and oil. There was tons of trash, car bodies. So just again, what are we going to do for, the short and long-term stages? And then recovery and protection strategies. So what are we going to do? Where are we going to do it? And then kind of how we're going to do it. So implementation, scheduling, and then kind of going into a plan. And when we first set out, we thought we'd actually have a plan that was essentially a book, essentially a standard plan. But what it turned out as, these tools, these GIS-based tools, were robust enough and provided all the detail we needed and got everything add it to a point where this became essentially our plan. It was a living online tool that folks had access to, and it went to FEMA and EPA and local jurisdictions. So everything just went computer based. So it was really quick. As we made updates and as we added data. So some tools that we use, I think these are actually pictures of, there was seeding. There were several different seeding methods used. This is pictures of the aerial seeding. Erosion prevention and sediment control. And I get asked this a lot. Why did you guys plant all the barley? And the whole purpose of the barley and the seeding that was done was a conscious choice. It was site stabilization only. We want to make sure we prevent erosion and we don't get any sediment, any toxic materials. That barley was a choice that was used in other fire projects, and its sole purpose was to stabilize the soil for a year. It was supposed to be non-germinating and largely was. And also from a fire perspective, even though it did grow, it was not thought to be generally a big fire risk or fire danger given how it grew. And then also based on the fire or recent fire going through. So other strategies, erosion prevention and sediment control. There is actually a difference in terms of, if you're really understand what these are. Erosion prevention is, the measures that really focus on protecting the soil. So if it rains, the rain dislodges soil, so it moves soil particles, and as it concentrates and flows essentially like a river, you get it carving materials, and basically you want to prevent that. So your soil protection, so you have, in this case, you have straw, you have matting, that's going to prevent erosion. And then you have sediment control, which means if you do have soil materials, toxins moving, you have something that's going to essentially block the flow, allow them to settle out. So one of the strategies that's used was called a wattle. So it kind of acts like a little dam, sort of like a little silt fence. So if water is going down, it's allowed to flow through this, and all the materials it's carrying is deposited behind it. So again, it protects the stream. So that was another tool. So there's just different how it was used in different locations. So again, protecting the soil, protecting it from going into streams. And it was done contractors. We had some volunteers doing it. So it was kind of it was a pretty intense effort. We also did some willow staking. So in areas that I mentioned that I showed you the arrow where the bank was degrading, one of the things that does work really well is willow staking. So you can actually cut willows. These were local willows. They were cut up by Emigrant Reservoir, and you can put them in the ground and they'll sprout out, and the roots will hold the soil in place while everything else kind of grows up behind it. So in areas that were pretty high risk from getting eroded out, we did utilize willow staking. So again, these are all just different tools, short-term methods, although willows are certainly native. And then we wanted to map where the strategies were recommended. So again, what do we need? What was the damage? What strategies can we use? Where do the strategies go? So again, building on, the data collected. So we started looking at just different, where we had some erosion, where we had hazardous materials, and kind of building layers on for what our restoration recommendations were. So we had aerial seeding. I think most people I know that I think that's probably saw the helicopters or were aware of them if they're featured in the paper, on the news. We had hydro seeding, so areas that were really steep. We basically, it's I'm unfortunately don't have any pictures of it, but basically you have a hose in the back of a truck and it's mixed with water and some tackifier, so it's sticky. So you shoot the seed on the steep slopes and it kind of sticks there and helps growing. So again, you don't get that erosion. We had some hand seeding, and then areas in ODOT. And then we have these areas called special needs, which were, these areas were actually identified, and they were complex enough, giving proximity to water, given high potential for hazardous materials, given proximity to what were homes, that we didn't feel like we were really, some of these basic measures wouldn't really help with these areas, and they needed special attention. So FEMA actually distributed the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They actually sent a team down to triage these areas and put wattles and the jute matting and all the things that were featured in those. So basically we sent these files to them. They came down, they had teams of engineers, and they went through and they went ahead and just took care of these areas for us. So it's kind of a neat process, that we were able to have some experts actually help us restore and protect these areas. So again, it was just a lot of mapping and a lot of, again, what do we need to do where? So then I mentioned too the scheduling. So what went into our fire work? Again, I mentioned the damage assessment, recovery plan development, implementation of early action items. So that's again the wattles, the jute matting, the willow staking, so the erosion control, seeding, hazardous material removal. That all went to the Department of Environmental Quality for looking at specifics. There were definitely some areas where they, and also FEMA. There were some cleanups that were organized, although certainly focused on non-hazardous. And I mentioned invasive species control. I mean, right after we started looking at that, right after the fires, because the blackberries and others came back really, really quick. And so a lot of the early activities were in 2020, and then we looked at doing some other things in 2021, and then what we're doing currently. So the work to actually rehabilitate, stabilize initial fire recovery was done by Jackson County. Sorry, I forgot the Oregon Department of Transportation, members of the Restoration Initiative, the FEMA response teams, volunteers, contractors. So it was, again, really, it was a flurry of work. It was really interesting to be part of it. And then, we had those initial activities and kind of moved into phase 2. So I want to pause for a second because I know that's a lot of information. Just if anybody had any questions about the initial fire response, which I'm calling phase 1, which again was that initial public safety and stabilization effort.
Greg, can I ask, I know last time the topic came up, the source of the fire was still under investigation. Have you heard that they've released any information regarding what actually started the fire?
I haven't heard, so I don't have any
Okay.
more information. The last I knew, it was undetermined.
Okay, we're on the same page then. Thanks.
Yeah. And then I wanted to go into what I'm calling more phase 2, which overlapped with phase 1 and what we're still working on. And again, includes all those early implementation actions that I mentioned, moving into active restoration. And then we're also working on assessing burned areas to see where adequate regrowth is occurring and where supplemental planning was needed. And then we're also kind of beginning the outreach. I think I have slides on detailing these because I realize that that's okay, great. So the active invasive species control, I mentioned that. We had a unique opportunity. We had essentially an ecological reset. We've been wanting to get rid of at least in the areas that burn, saying that, these are a huge risk. They're a fire risk, but to take them out, just how difficult it is with the spread of the blackberries was cost prohibitive, and we didn't have the manpower. But it provided this opportunity. One of the first things we did is we were able to get funding through FEMA, through Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District. So the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to really get on the invasive. So we're working with several contractors, and I believe I have a map coming up, and it's both herbicides and some manual control. And we're also allowing for native regeneration. One of the things that we saw is not only the invasive species rebound, but there's a lot of the native species that regenerate on their own. So cottonwood, snowberry, wild roses. So in some cases, if we kept the invasive species down, the natives would rebound. I mentioned the willow staking. There was some active planting. I'll talk a little bit. I think I have some pictures of the Rogue River Watershed Council's Blue Heron project, and then continuing monitoring and assessment. So managing invasive species, and we have a number of different contractors and kind of send them out for some are specialists. Well, they're all specialists, so we don't have anybody out there doing wide broadcast spraying. It's more, because we're working in a more sensitive habitat, we're working near water where we can apply herbicides. We are. I know it's a little bit of a people have mixed opinions on that, but from a reality standpoint, when you're talking about a huge area, multiple invasive species, it's hard to at least not use that as one of your tools in your toolbox. We do use manual removal and others, but just the sheer magnitude makes it impractical to do much to not have that as one of our tools. And we also work within, boundaries of, somebody asked about, how different jurisdictions do. If somebody has specific requests of, we don't want any, herbicide use, we won't use it in those jurisdictions or around areas. So, I mean, we're willing to work with the communities or with the landowners on, and do the best we can with the tools that we have at our disposal. So we use mechanical, we use hand, we use chemical. But that's been active since I think October of 2020. And usually the fall, the spring are times where, we're out there, they're applying before the weeds can really take hold. So I mentioned the native species regrowth. So again, this was not too long after the fire, getting sprouts. Some of this is from the seeding, and some of this actually looks like I'm not sure if it's kind of looks like an ash, but I'm not a botanist. So, but again, we started seeing, we were anticipating the need to really get out there and plant early, but saw this great regrowth. So we decided to wait a little bit, focus on some of these other things. And now, while the species are regrowing, we are now looking at, we figured if I could go back to the schedule, but basically we're figuring probably this past fall would be the first time. Fall of 2021 is really when we'd first looking at large scale planting. But we haven't done it as yet, but we are in the process of doing a comprehensive assessment to look at where regrowth is really working and where we need to supplementally plant. So this is a project that was underway as part of the restoration initiative prior to the fire, and they're able to rearrange some funding to work in Blue Heron Park post the fire. So this is in Phoenix. So this is again the Road River Watershed Council. So they are able to do a bunch of invasive species control, remove a lot of the debris that was out there, get some planting in, and again do some erosion prevention and stabilization as well. So just kind of our in summary, active restoration, again, the invasive species, and then the planting elements. So the natural regeneration, seeding, planting, willow staking. There's active monitoring and assessment. And then looking at tying in some of the future projects, there is some early floodplain work being done, looking at some reconnections. As I mentioned, we found a lot of wetland seeps and springs. So looking at how we can take advantage of some of the cooler water, and then, starting outreach and engagement to the community. And then I think kind of end by talking a little bit about just mentioning regional projects, that there are a number of big projects going on. I keep talking about the Envision Bear Creek, and that's something that Jackson County is in charge of, and they're working with some consultants to do essentially, my interpretation of it is a conceptual master plan of the Greenway, and taking a look at, the different areas, what people want, how to look at some of these management objectives, maybe long-term, how to fund, some pieces of it in terms of taking care of it. And, I went to a citizens advisory committee last week, and, people were talking about, habitat and lights and safety and, all sorts of different issues. So I encourage you to take the survey I mentioned on the Envision Bear Creek website to help provide some public input into the process. And the Bear Creek Restoration Initiative members, several of us are serving on different advisory teams for that. And then the technical assistance that I'm noting down here is something that we applied for to help us answer, in developing some of these restoration strategies, especially in relation to some of these management issues, like maybe if we have some professional assistants who has some experience with dealing with, managing the unhoused strategies that work with the unhoused population and restoration or public safety, they can help us with that. And then some of the restoration recommendations would kind of feed into the Bear Creek plan, the Envision Bear Creek, so there isn't a redundancy in information. And then there is a Highway 99. I think it's also called I think it's a revisioning plan, and that one is led by the Department of Land Conservation Development, and they're looking at, I think I'm not an expert on this project, so if somebody else knows more, please feel free to correct me if I say something wrong, is that they're looking at the area that burned essentially in Phoenix and Talent in Jackson County in the fire along Highway 99, and how to, rehabilitate that area from a, business and home standpoint, and looking at transportation elements. And the tie-in to our project is that they're looking at how to increase connections to the Greenway, and also tie into some of those businesses that are along the Greenway, looking at, fire resiliency, natural resources management, some of those. So some of the members of the Restoration Initiative are also serving on technical teams for that project as well.
Right. We do have another question. How is it determined that a burned tree is not going to survive and needs to be removed? So what kind of determination do you have for those?
There are several botanists that were hired, like there are specialists for that go out and take a look at, the tree. And there's a number that were marked along the trail. I think there's a blue and a red for what they thought was going to be a, need to be removed. Like basically, dying or may recover. And then there's also looking at if a tree fell over, was it likely to, anything that was going to fall on the trail was removed. I mean, that was just good precaution. And generally, in a lot of places, people are encouraged to go off the trail. So there may have been some trees that were left, figuring that, the risk to people was pretty low. But again, there are specialists who make the call, and it's not me, or that's not our specialty, but there were folks that made that or hired to do that. And then just in wrap up, again, I tried to present an idea of what's being done a little bit more at the regional scale, but there are some things that, if you're interested, you can do at home. There are local resources. There's the StreamSmart website, which has some information on riparian projects and others. There are lots of resources online. Again, this is something that comes from StreamSmart as well. Just some things to think about if you live along a creek, and how can you make your landscaping, more fish friendly. So again, a lot of good ideas out there. Again, programs on StreamSmart. And then, the restoration initiative, one of the goals or the ideas behind it is that if you have questions, you can contact any of the members, and we can try to direct you to the right place if it's not us. I mean, collaboratively, we have a tremendous amount of resources that we can provide, and we also are available for questions, to provide technical assistance, help on properties. So again, it varies quite a bit. Looks like Al's got a question. I think your mic, you're on mute, Al.
There we go. Now I'm on. Okay. Yeah. Greg Al Muehlhofer. I'm on Phoenix City Council. I've got a question for you that has been bugging me for quite a while. And that is, in Phoenix, we've had great restoration being done, as you've already pointed out. But right along the Greenway in Phoenix, we have a series of wetlands. And the one that's been really cleaned up quite a while ago was the one that's behind the Civic Center. And that's sort of a really beautiful example of what you can do. But going south from there, we have wetlands that are actually owned by the city, and we have wetlands that are owned by private property owners, particularly the one south of First Street, between First Street and going into Blue Heron Park. And actually, we have a wetland there at Blue Heron Park as well. After the fire, you've been concentrating on the Greenway, and I understand that. But when you look at some of the wetlands that were affected by the fire, we've got down trees. We've got it looks like nothing has been done to really address the future of these wetlands. I guess my question to you is, what should be done with these wetlands? Could you expand your mission to look into them and really find some grant money to do it? I know that Rogue River Watershed Council has been working very well with us, and we're pleased with the results, but I'm really concerned about these wetland areas. There's a wetland that's just to the north of Blue Heron Park. It's a very small area, but again, we got down trees. I'm not an expert, but I'd like somebody to come in and look at it and determine what should be done. And it'd be wonderful if we could find some type of a funding mechanism to help out. Okay, I'm going to stop. Tell me what we can do. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Al. It's great questions. And I, certainly focused our efforts on, what's being done. Bear Creek, that was the again, most of the resource, the effort for a lot of different reasons. And, really the work can be done anywhere where it's burned. So we did look a little bit at different tributaries going up and connections to the creek. So that area, those weren't completely forgotten about. I mean, actually the picture we're looking at is actually Payne Creek. So this is actually getting outside of Bear Creek. So we can look at areas we've missed, probably was just certainly a resource standpoint. So we can go ahead and look at, these areas that have been identified, like I know the wetland you're talking about, and it certainly is within our mission, because prior to the fire, we were looking at the whole corridor, as I mentioned, which includes wetlands, includes tributaries, all of those things went into how we prioritize our sites that we were looking at. And, we've done a number of different studies looking at where we're getting, cold water refugia, cold water. And in these springs, these wetlands are critical for that to provide the habitat for the fish. I think it's just that with all the pressures, they just kind of have been forgotten about for now, but now's the time we really need to start looking at these. So there should be some resources that we can provide, and some funding sources out there for projects like this. So as we find out about them, we'll put them on our list, and we'll work to rehabilitate and restore as many areas as we can.
Yeah, I guess one of the, the key questions is when I look at all those burnt trees that are laying in the wetlands, should they stay there? Should they be taken out? What should be done? I want a conscious decision. And I think most of the people in Phoenix, we've got groups that are talking about it, and they've been searching for answers. And the city of Phoenix is not able to really deal with it. We don't have the staff or the funds, so we're looking to other organizations to really help us. And I would appreciate whatever RVCOG can do. We need the help.
Okay, great. Yeah, and actually that's something that we actually have initiative has a meeting tomorrow, so it's a good topic as we, to kind of revisit, who did that, and then how we can get resources other places. So I know the county and ODOT were the big leads in those two, and I'm not sure who they use, but they should provide some feedback. And I think, again, it's a question of safety concerns, and anything that looks like it's a potential concern, I think would be recommended to take down. And I'll see if I can find out who made that call for the county and for ODOT.
Okay, I really appreciate it. If you could send anything to me, on the city website, you'll find my email address, and I'm on city council. So thank you very much. I really, I think it's an area, we've concentrated on housing. We're concentrating on our economic development for commercial businesses, but part of the heart of downtown Phoenix is all these series of wetlands that we have right behind our commercial corridor on 99. And it's sort of being ignored. I mean, the Greenway, finally, we have the Envision project for the Greenway, and that's being looked at. But again, right between all of it is these series of wetlands that need to be addressed. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Greg, there's a question about Oregon State University Extension's involvement. I know they are a partner in the Stream Smart, but are they involved in any of the restoration components?
They haven't been to date. We did talk in developing some of our strategies and our, recommendations and some of the things that we did talk with Oregon State, but where they have not really been directly involved. They kind of seem to operate in a different area, although we have had the student watershed assessment teams, so Cara Baylog's group, help us do some monitoring and assessment in the area. We did talk to Max Bennett and some others, in developing some of our priorities.
Great, thank you.
And I should also add that the restoration initiative is certainly a voluntary is a voluntary group open to, anyone who supports the mission. And I believe that Oregon State University Extension was approached about participating. And again, they were very busy, so I don't think they were available at the time. But, certainly if they're interested, they have a lot of great resources that can help out, and they would be welcome to, certainly sign on to the MOA and participate with us.
Yeah, and Greg, I do know that they have a relatively new person who's in charge of the Master Gardener program. So we can do an outreach there, but some of the impacts we're all seeing in not just the public sector, but private sector everywhere are just staffing issues. So some of the coordination and collaboration can be hampered by changes in staff or a unfilled position. So we're trying to collaborate with an unfilled position that makes it difficult. Colette, you have your hand up.
Yes, we are losing, the Master Gardeners is losing their coordinator. She is moving to Colorado and working, I think, through May 31st, and they don't expect to fill that position until this fall. So I'm not sure what our involvement could be at all at this time.
So I was recently connected with Danielle, and I was given her contact as a Master Gardener connection.
Oh, I don't know who Danielle is.
Yeah, she's up in Grants Pass, and so I'm not sure if.
Oh, she's Josephine County.
Josephine County.
I'm Jackson County.
Yeah,
different
so
county.
it may be Jackson County that's missing their coordinator, but there's a potential
Yeah.
to, borrow some of Josephine County's support during the interim.
And I just thought in relation to OSU Extension too, I mean, most of the work that we've done has been with either Kara or Rachel Whirling or Max, but we did talk to them about helping us out. That we've gotten some funding through the Wings Across America program to provide pollinator plants. So I know Craig Tuss talked to Rachel about the need for some plants and also housing some plants. So they're helping us with that. And then also possibly with some long-term maintenance involving some of the Master Gardeners, because the pollinator, some of the smaller pollinator gardens that are being reestablished probably won't need a lot of care and feeding. So, I mean, it's something that, a program with some volunteer hours, we definitely have a need for some assistance. So seeing if that might be a good partnership.
Well, I do know that the Jackson County Master Gardeners did provide a scholarship for the Heron, some of the refurbishing work on that. So we did a little bit, but
And I also know that we are also working with other, Southern Oregon University and some other students as well. I mean, there's plenty of need, there's plenty of work. It's just everybody's really busy and spread thin that, it's possible. It's just the timing wasn't right. There may be some misconnections.
All right. Were there any other questions for Greg? I'm not seeing any hands up, so I just want to follow up with everybody and turn it back to Greg if there are no more questions. All right, Greg, seeing none, it's back to you.
Okay, well, I just want to, again, thank everyone for their attention. And I have had my email at the beginning, but I'm sure if there's ways to get in contact with me, if you have questions, there's also currently on the RVCOG website, there's a Bear Creek Restoration Initiative page that talks a little bit about the program. So there's, the organizations involved, and I'm happy to link up with, connect you with anybody on that. I certainly encourage you to, get involved with some of the region-wide programs, and there also should be some stakeholder programs coming out through the restoration initiative, some education. I know the Road River Watershed Council got some funding for that. So we have a group that's focused on that. There should be some public input and some other things involved in that as well. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of that in the foreseeable future. If you're interested in restoration, or like Al, tying in some other elements we may have missed, this is great input for us moving forward.
All right. Well, Greg, thank you very, very much. Just to let everyone know, session 3 next Tuesday, you will be with our natural resources program staff once again, focusing on volunteer and education programs. And as we did after the last session, I will follow up with all of the participants with the slide deck from today, so you can go back and review the information that was presented. So any other questions from our participants? Again, I thank you for your interest in RVCOG, and I thank you for joining us. And are there any last thoughts before we sign off? All right. Seeing none, I thank you all for participating. Thank you again, Greg, and we will see natural resources for our course next week.
All right.
Thank you, Emery.
Thanks.
This was wonderful information. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Greg did a great job.
Indeed.
Thank you.